Hi, everybody. It's Deirdre Fay, and I am so glad to be here with Stan Steindl, who I specifically sought out to talk about motivational interviewing because it was something I've heard a lot about over the years, but I wanted to know more. And Stan is an expert. He's one of the trainers of motivational interviewing. He's from Brisbane, Australia, a long, far way away from me. He's a clinical psychologist. I've known him through the compassionate mind world, which you all know I'm so interested in. He's in private practice in Brisbane, and psychological consultants is the name of the business. He's also a part of the compassionate mind research group in the University of Queensland there in Australia. And a really cool keynote is that he's going to Mind Life, the Mind Life Institute, and the next one that's coming up. So he's got a lot to talk to us about. So Stan, welcome.
Good morning. Morning here in Australia.
Talk about time change. So, motivational interviewing. People say it's really helpful in getting people to change and do things differently. That's why I wanted to talk to you, because I know that people that I know, including myself, sometimes get stuck at not changing. We don't want to change old patterns or ways of being. And we get stuck in that, and we don't know how to change. So tell us more, Stan.
Well, as you say, behavior change is difficult. Actually, it's difficult for all of us. Most of us don't like to change the side of the bed we sleep on, for example, or we don't like to change the way that we sort of go to work every day. I think as human beings, we kind of like the familiar, and we feel safer with things as they are. Sometimes, actually, even when the way things are is also really difficult for us. So even in the face of, certain behaviours that might be causing us discomfort or difficulties or negative consequences, still we don't like to change. I remember I was, I think I was in Townsville here in Australia one time to run a workshop, and I was catching the cab from the airport, I guess, and the cab driver asked me, "Well, what are you doing here in Townsville?" And I thought, "Oh, well, I'll tell him." So I started to tell him about motivational interviewing and all this sort of stuff. And he sort of says to me, "People don't like change." And I thought, that's genius. You're right. People don't like change. So, motivational interviewing is just a way, not so much to get people to change, but to help people to kind of explore their own motivations, their own ambivalence. They often will feel two ways about it. So on the one hand, they might not want to change or feel able to change or feel that they need to change. But on the other hand, often somewhere in there are these other motivations where, in fact, actually they do want to change, or they do feel like there are some possible ways they could do it, or reasons or need to get it changed. So that motivation interviewing is really about helping people to kind of explore their own motivations, maybe bring some of those arguments for change to the surface, and then just gently kind of help them come up with a bit of a commitment or a plan to make a change.
So is this an ongoing process where you do it over time? It's not like a magic cure that suddenly your new motivation is unearthed and now you're gung-ho and you're ready to change completely and forever.
Yeah, it's interesting with motivational interviewing or MI because sometimes it can be very brief. Sometimes there can be just a really brief conversation, just nicely sort of exploring a couple of little things. People come to a commitment that might be around a modest but practical change, and off they go. And it can be actually really useful in that way. Sometimes, though, it's an over time thing, and often it's a 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Change is difficult again. And so sometimes there can be a role for motivational interviewing at the start, and then people, off they go and they do a few things differently. And then at some point, motivational interviewing might become relevant again because things get difficult, or we lapse back, or those sorts of things. So it can be a an ongoing process. Often it works really well too if people are going through a particular journey or even a treatment process or something like that. MI can be a great way just to kind of keep the motivation buoyant across time as they're making changes, facing challenges, that sort of.
I like that word buoyant. So it's like we stay more connected to it. It's, rather than being dragged down into the old ways of being. Well, Stan, what keeps people? Why, and it kills me, including myself. Why, when I know something would be better for me, do I not do it?
Well, I certainly have a gym membership, but yes, we can frustrate ourselves sometimes. But there's many reasons in motivational interviewing. What we explore from that point of view is something called sustained talk. And sustained talk is the language of the person that we're talking to that is really referring to not changing. And sometimes there can be, very clear reasons that a person has to actually not changing. It might be, for example, that, we're working with someone who we know the physio has said really needs to get mobile. And if they were to get more mobile, they might have less pain. But the person we're talking to is really fearful of pain. And the last thing they want to do is for the pain to get worse. So their sustained talk might be one of the reasons, and perhaps even, one of the things that makes it really important for them not to do it is this fear of pain. And they believe that things will get worse if they start to get mobile. So so in motivational interviewing, one of the first things to do is to really understand, but also help the person feel understood about those particular individual reasons that they hold not to change. We definitely don't want to argue with those because they're very valid, very legitimate, and even if they're not maybe correct from the point of view of their health practitioners or something like that, it's still very valid. And so we want to validate that and kind of accept that that's a piece of it too. And so people might feel that there are certain reasons not to change. They might feel there's certain need or importance not to change, like this is really important for them somehow, or they might feel unable to change. They might not know how to do it or what would work for them, or they might just simply not want to change. The desire is just not there. So, and it's many and varied things. One of the really useful parts of MI is to sort of work out what is it for them. What is the things for them in their lives that really kind of become barriers to making changes like this. For me, with going to the gym, for example, just to be silly about it, is things like I don't have time. I have other things I'd rather do. When I get home from work late at night, I just prefer to plonk on the couch and watch Netflix. That sort of thing.
I'm sure nobody resonates with that, Stan.
Yeah, it's so unique of me.
Well, I'm thinking about some of the internal things like self-criticism, or the places where we're mean to ourselves, and how why wouldn't we be nicer to ourselves? Why wouldn't we say something good or try to be compassionate? Or I think especially of people who have a lot of trauma or have worked with have attachment difficulties and relational difficulties, and why would I trust somebody? Why would I? And I'm kind of even looking at how complicated it can be for somebody to change.
Yeah, and motivational interviewing, really the first key sort of step is to create a relationship where the person feels safe, where they feel heard and understood and where they feel safe. And so in MI, we sort of call it the MI spirit, I guess, but in, you know, it's probably familiar to you. You know, we really want to try to be kind of collaborative or have a good sense of partnership. Neither of us are more important than the other. It's kind of a conversation in that sense. We're wanting it to be accepting and respectful and non-judgmental, and we want it to be compassionate, so that we're kind of clearly there in service of this person's well-being. And the way we kind of do all of that too is to really be evocative. We're trying to ask, not tell, to listen with empathy, and all of those sorts of things. But yes, you're right. When people are, you know, when they've experienced trauma in their past, or you know, other really significant challenges, or, you know, even when there's been very negative and severe consequences to the behaviour, the thing that we always want to be really sort of aware of and kind of gentle with is feelings of shame. And feelings of fear and vulnerability and shame are often important, as you say, internal barriers. And because, you know, people really do have that wisdom that they perhaps kind of, you know, that change would be a good idea. And if we go in there and sort of tell them this is what you should do, then we might evoke that shame and self-criticism. And then all that really does is it makes people kind of want to, you know, hide away and not talk about it, and just try to not think about it. So yeah, there's something really there in the relationship in MI, in creating safety first, or safeness between us, and then be able to kind of work in and around those really deeper feelings of fear and vulnerability and shame.
Does this perspective, and do you hold that underneath our resistances or our not wanting to do it, that well, I guess because you use the word evoke, so when we're evoking something, we're evoking what? We're hoping that they want to change, or that there's a better way forward, or that I guess makes me think of, well, why change then? The perspective holds that there's something better than living the way that we're living. Would that be right, Stan?
Yeah, I mean, at the heart of MI is exploring language. And there's the old saying, you know, I know what I believe when I hear myself speak, is kind of part of that. And so when I refer to evoking, it really is to see if we can evoke from the person, you know, their own arguments for change, which, you know, are probably there too. Mostly people feel two ways about this stuff. You know, I need to change, but I don't think I can. Or I really, I think I could change, but actually I don't really think I need to, or things like that. So when I say evoking, it's about understanding and validating that sustained talk stuff, but then also just shifting towards change talk, the sorts of things that people might say about, you know, arguing for change. And Bill Miller and Steve Rolnick kind of developed motivational interviewing originally. And one of Bill's really wonderful metaphors is, you know, that people are deep wells, and, you know, down the bottom of these wells, there's probably mud and water and frogs and whatever else, but there's also these pearls of motivation. And so our job really is to bring those pearls to the surface, and to help people to really express their desire, their reasons, their need, or their ability to make changes. And so it comes from actually like a philosophical position that people have this within them. And it's much more about our job is to bring that to the surface So it's not opening up their heads and tipping stuff in.
Right.
It's much more evocative, much more exploring the wisdom that is within all of us about, what really will be helpful for us and what's in our own best interests.
Oh, I like that. What will be in our best interest, and trusting that, like you somewhere you had mentioned the idea of respecting that we all know what is in our best interest, and being drawn toward that if we just have the clearing ground to do that.
Mm-hmm. In fact, in MI, we would prefer to be able to respect a person's choice not to change. We really connect deeply with this notion of respecting the person and respecting that they might know a thing or two about their lives and what's really important. And it's much more about supporting their autonomy in that and supporting their choices in that, rather than really trying to confront or challenge or make them change their mind, sort of thing. We're not doing that kind of stuff. We're really wanting to respect choices, and it's an interesting thing, because when we respect someone, when we respect them and we respect their choices, even when we respect their choices not to change, it actually makes it more likely that they will change. because none of us really like to be told what to do. I mean, one of the theories that sometimes is brought into MI is that self-determination theory, that as human beings, we want to be self-determined. And sometimes that means I'm going to keep doing what I know is not good for me just for the sake of being self-determined and not doing what everyone else is telling me to do. Sort of. And so from a self-determination sort of point of view, if we can respect that and respect people's choices, I don't know, it just sort of frees them up. They're able to explore it now, just more, explore both sides, more willingly.
So I guess I'm thinking here, is there a way, you're talking about it mostly of using it with other people, like in a therapeutic environment. I'm thinking, is there a way we could create an intervention or a way that we could intervene with ourselves? So if somebody's watching this and saying, okay, how can I use this? Is there a writing experience, or is there something where we can be listening to ourselves, trying to be as open-ended with all the parts of us that say, no, I'm no good, I'm bad, or whatever it is, I shouldn't, nobody loves me, all the things that happen. Is there a way to hold all that open and maybe write the fears or the rejections or the whatever they are down, and open-endedly make space for them? Internal family systems model does this, by providing room for welcoming all the parts. We do this in Compassionate Mind, thinking about how do we have multiple selves. So I'm thinking, is there a way to do this? I know in therapy, sometimes I have people take even Post-its and put whatever they're thinking about it and put it in one chair and something else in another chair. But they don't feel like they can move chairs, just taking the bits out and putting it out in the world. And then maybe interacting it. What do you think about that, Stan?
Yeah, it's just as you're speaking there, my brain is kind of ticking over a bit, because in many ways it does, because as you know, I'm a very big fan of compassion-focused work as well, and in many ways, this could be a part of how we start to have conversations between more vulnerable parts of ourselves and our compassionate self.
Right.
So, for example, I'm just thinking out loud, but compassionate letter writing or a compassionate letter to myself, that you could almost imagine that the way that that's done is a little bit like a therapist or clinician hearing the sustained talk, hearing the stuff that the person doesn't like about themselves, hearing the self-criticism, hearing the inadequacy, hearing all of that. And then the compassionate letter is kind of the empathic, validating, accepting, kind of part to MI that we might do with sustained talk. But then the compassionate self could ask, after that process, the compassionate self could ask 5 key questions, I think. One key question, the first one is, given all of what you've said, and that's all, very, very difficult, but very, very valid. But the first question is, what would you like to change? What would you like to change next in your life about this thing that you're struggling with? And that would be tapping into just desire or preference or what they'd like or want to change. The next question to ask is, what would be the 3 best reasons that I would make this change? And then just starting to explore, what are my reasons for doing this? What is it about? Why would it be good for me? Or might things be better? What are 3 best reasons to make this change? The third question might be, okay, so given those reasons, what makes change, or what makes this change really important to you? Why does it matter? Why does it fit with your values? Or why is it something that really kind of you might need to change? The fourth question is, all right, well, given what I'd like to change, why I'd like to change it, and kind of what makes it important, if I were to make this change, how would I go about it? What could I do? What might be the strategies, the solutions? What might I need to actually help me make this change? And then finally, again, given what I'd like to change, why I'd like to change it, what makes that important, and now how I'd go about it, what will I do next? What's my commitment now? What's my next step that I will take in making this change? And I think it's really interesting because, those are questions that the compassionate self may very well bring to that conversation. Often the compassionate self is about, trying to sort of express the empathy and sympathy and trying to be sensitive to this suffering and all that sort of stuff. But it also is about taking us towards action and taking us towards change. And so maybe those 5 questions one could even just ask of themselves.
Oh, that's dynamite. That's dynamite. I think I'm going to put a link to the compassionate letter writing. That's the perfect thing. Put the questions, what are they, and have people be able to explore this on their own. I do this meditation where I have people go into the future, like when they're 90 years old, and how they knew the steps to help them change from now to then. But that would be a nice concrete.
That's wonderful too.
With those 5 questions, what did you know, and how did you know how to do that? And that's perfect, man. I love that. Now, one of the recent emails that you and somebody on the Compassionate Mind listserv were talking about music as so how does that fit into all this as you think about it? Do you feel ready to talk about that yet? I know it was just a brief thought.
Yeah, no, we have done some research trying to look at compassionate meditation and music, we had these 3 groups, and one group received the meditation plus the music, one group just received the meditation just as the spoken word, and then another group just received a kind of a music intervention where they were invited to select their own music to sort of have to meditate to, if you like, and then we followed them up a couple of weeks later and stuff like that. And it was very interesting actually, because all 3 groups improved in their feelings of compassion and self-compassion. So even just listening to music can be a compassionate act, and that makes sense to me. That compassion, as we see it in the compassionate mind sort of world, compassion is a motivation. And then it motivates us to take action that might alleviate suffering. And so the action itself can really be anything. And I think music is a very great example for some people, is a very compassionate and self-compassionate experience. So that was the little study that we did. But the idea behind it, I think, is that, as you know, people often feel two ways about engaging in a compassion-focused therapy approach. You know, people feel two ways about therapy too, and about coming along. And that's completely valid and legitimate and all that other stuff that we said before. And so I guess what I was doing with that program was just to see whether there were ways to enhance engagement with compassion meditation and compassion-based interventions. And the idea was that, the question I had was, would people be sort of more engaged if there was this other piece to it, the musical accompaniment? And definitely in some of the qualitative stuff that we drew from that study, it was very interesting because a number of people definitely felt more engaged and found it more enjoyable and felt that they were more likely to continue engaging with it. But some people sort of actually preferred the silence around meditation, and actually some people weren't, their musical preferences meant that they weren't so into the actual guitar accompaniment that we used, and they prefer different sounds and whatever it might be. So it was very interesting qualitatively. But yeah, I think the idea there is that it's really cool for people to find ways that really enhance the experience for them and make them feel more likely to engage, more committed to the process. And if they're more committed to the process, then it's going to, I guess, possibly be more helpful, is the idea. So yeah, that was that interest.
That's fascinating, right? Because I'd heard different things about adding music to meditations allows the right brain to just soften a little and flow along rather than getting trapped up and trying to figure things out. And so I was curious about how that worked out. And of course, and there's people prefer one thing or another, but
yeah. Musical preference is actually quite important in the music psychology literature. It studies where they allow for people to choose their own music have a much more powerful effect. And there's kind of research out there that if you really love, death metal, then death metal is probably what's going to relax you. So it's much better. Your musical preference seems to be an important phenomenon in that literature.
So the most important thing is to lower the stress so that the compassion naturally flows. The motivation arises. Is that right?
Yeah, I think when we're wanting to make it more, for want of a better word, attractive to come along in the first place, and then once you're there, I think the music can aid in creating that sort of softening, slowing down, soothing effect that we're interested in, and opening people up to engage with the compassion motivation.
It's just a joining. It's a way for people to join.
I think so. Yeah, that's how I was conceptualizing it.
Right, I didn't think of that.
Yeah,
I didn't think about that, but of course that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I did Anthony Garcia is the guitarist that I collaborate with, and we did a big session of music and compassion meditation at our local state gallery of modern art, and it was wonderful. We had like over 200 people crammed into this kind of exhibition space, and everyone was sitting on their cushions with their eyes closed and the view out the window. And I think that it just can really help to sort of draw people in and make them curious and come along and experience it. And then, it opens them up to compassion.
So is there anything else you're working on that you want to talk to us about, or?
Oh, there's lots of things going on. I'm very excited because this year at Compassionate Mind Foundation international conference, I'm going to be doing a workshop on motivational interviewing and CFT. So I'm pretty excited to give that a go and see what people think about how these two approaches can kind of complement each other, I guess. The interesting thing about MI is that part of the MI spirit is compassion. And so then the interesting thing about compassion-focused therapy is compassion is a motivation. So I feel like they are kind of, close cousins and would work really well together. So yeah, that's probably one of the things that I'm looking forward to later in the year.
All right. Well, thank you for your time.
My pleasure. I'm going to, it's a public holiday here. It's a Monday, but a public holiday. So I'm just going to go out and get coffee now.
Well, that sounds like a good plan.
That's a commitment.
That's a good one, Stan. Thanks.
All right. Okay.